through drawing pictures, writing words. I have this fantasy if anyone wants to play along. And every once in a while I think of it. This morning was one of the days on the way in I was thinking about it. I have this fantasy of like, what if we all took notes right now the best we could? Like, I drew pictures because that's what I do best, right? Or I put down words or, you know, whatever, frame by frame, whatever that was. And then what if you all submitted them to me and then I scanned them in and made them one document? Like, what would happen? What would that do? So if you ever want to collectively combine your sketches, let me know because I will happily be the person who puts them all together. So that being said, let's do this. So this is an introduction to the bitmap environment. And the most important thing as we move through this space is to really understand that there are two different color languages that we speak on a computer and on a printer. And those are RGB, red, green, and blue, and CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And we've talked about this a little bit when we talked about setting up a print document and converting to CMYK because we were going to print with it. But we haven't really gotten deep into it. And so when you talk about RGB color, you should think of it in terms of light generated. So RGB color is what drives monitors. It's what drives scanners. It's what drives digital display in general. And we're moving into a time where we have 4K monitors, so we're using more bandwidth even than just that traditional RGB scope. But the most important thing to understand about it is that it's able to produce hundreds to millions of colors, right? So that monitor that sits in front of you right now, that monitor can show you millions of colors. There is not a printer in this world that can show you those millions of colors. So there was a time 10 years ago, maybe longer now, maybe like 15, where ever since I started teaching, I would say to my students, I dream of a day when you'll hold a magazine illuminated in front of you, and you'll flip through those illuminated pages, and you will see light-driven art. And then it happened. And it was like, oh my God. And I'll never forget, I was reading like, I don't know, Time, Newsweek, something like that, like a pretty boring magazine that my husband had given me. And he said, just read this article. You got to read this article. And I'm sorry if you like Time or Newsweek and it's your favorite publication, but it just, at the end of the day, I don't really want to read Time or Newsweek, right? So, and this is, I don't know how many years ago, the year that the iPad came out. Oh. So I flip the page in the article, and there he has printed out that he had pre-ordered me the first iPad. And he said, this is what you always said would happen. And it was like, oh my God. And then when I finally got it, and I realized that I could sit on my couch and watch TED Talks, and like I could sit on my couch and draw, and then I could read a book, and then I could read a magazine. I was like, oh, mind blown. Just gone from that moment on. So, but all of that happens in RGB space. So there are millions of colors. We're bombarded by light, and light affects our eyes, affects our brain in different ways than print, right? So it makes sense that when we're working in Photoshop, when we're actively working, we're editing, we're changing things, we're adjusting things, we're adding layers, we're using filters, we're always going to be in RGB color because that is the native language of the thing we are working on, whether it's an iPad, whether it's a computer, or a scanner, that's the native language. So RGB is light-driven and used in those places. CMYK color is pigment-driven. So in order to get that full spectrum of color, we now have to combine toner or ink or pigment in order to get those colors. So it has a smaller gamut. Gamut is the amount of color that can be shown, right? So it can produce thousands of colors, but not those millions of colors. And there are certain colors that fall outside of that gamut. We talked about this a little bit with some of your last projects. Green and purple tend to be the most problematic because they fall the furthest off the spectrum. So our Epson 9000 in here actually prints with more than just CMYK color. So you're actually getting more of a range there than you get on this color printer and most of your traditional color printers at home, although more and more people are buying multicolor printers like Epson driven 8-color, 7-color, 9-color printers. Generally, when you send something to press, they're just using cyan, magenta, yellow, black, and then if you're specifying another pigment, like I want to add light magenta because I want really rich color, or I want to add white because I want to have a certain effect, or I want to add gloss, right? But generally, anytime we print, we use CMYK. So, some important things also beyond color that we need to understand is that bitmap images, those images that we work with that are pixel-based, they exist on a fixed grid, and it divides the picture into individual picture elements that we refer to as pixels. Each pixel element contains unique information specific to its location. So unlike Illustrator that gave mathematical formulas to define, you put this shape here and it's this color, you put this shape here and it's that color, this shape's here, this color. Each pixel has a very specific color and purpose. All right? So how many colors a pixel can describe depends on the bit depth, right? So if we're looking at our monitors or at these high resolution screens, we've got a really broad bit depth. I'll use a perfect example. I have a TV in my bedroom that is, I don't know how old, but it is literally like, I'm like, can I even see what's on that screen sometimes? Because it just doesn't have that broad range of color that newer monitors do, that I've now become so conditioned to using that when I don't have all that information, my mind has a hard time, looking at it. In the same regard, I'm a huge football fan. When I used to watch football, even 20 years ago, it was like I was watching football through a little bit of a haze. Today, you watch football, it's like you're on the field if you've got a really high-end, right, monitor. Like if we watch football on these, it would be amazing. Sometimes I fantasize that I'll just come in here and watch football on Sunday, but well, whatever. And the guys who put those up said that too. They're like, we're going to come in here and watch the football games. I'm like, come in and watch them. So bit depth plays a big role in what we see on our screen. And so using the binary number system, a pixel can have from 1 to 48 bits, although it can have even more information than that. And the more bits that something has, the more colors it can describe. So the higher the bit depth, the greater the color range, the greater the gamut. And gamut is G-A-M-U-T. Gamut. I love that word. Pixel-based computer applications allow direct manipulation of picture and surface properties. Because they exist on this fixed grid, though, it restricts the image's optimum resolution to the set of intervals used at the time of conception. If you scan something in at 72 resolution at 2 inches by 2 inches, it's going to look disastrous at 10 inches by 10 inches, right? We've all downloaded something from the internet and tried to print it out. It looks terrible. Tried to blow it up. It looks terrible, right? If you're smart as an artist, you do this purposefully so that nobody steals your artwork, right? But you cannot, even with the strength of Photoshop, you just can't fix low res. You can't fix it without the original. You can make it better, but you can't fix it. All right? So we have to understand that pixels, what pixels means, right? We have to understand tonal range, which is the degree of light and dark and all the colors in between. Because matching tonal ranges between images in Photoshop is what allows you to bring them all together and they look like they started out together. If we don't match tonal range, then it looks like things came from different sources. We are living in a time that is so different. So I'd say right around the year 1998. I'm totally guessing here. I was not planning on having this discussion today, but around 1998, people started to realize that people airbrushed photos, right? People started doing more creative stuff as Photoshop came onto the scene. It wasn't as hard to do. You could take, the example I think of is one I show in 216. You could take Martha Stewart, who was in prison, and make her look like she was posing for a photo shoot for a magazine before she got out of prison, which had people in an uproar because people believed photographs were real. As time passes, we still believe photographs are real, especially when they're believable. But we live in a time where everything has shifted. I mean, even more recently, right? Last week, the White House changed video that they gave out to the public, right? There was an interaction between our president and a journalist, and the White House released a changed video. So not only is video or are photos affected, but now video is affected. Like, we live in a world where if you're good at it, you can make anybody believe anything, right? And so, you know, people grow up believing that the women in the magazines look how they look. No pores, right? Perfect bodies. Like, all of those things are created by designers, right? It's people's job. Someone's job at the White House is to edit film, right? Probably many people's jobs at the White House or anywhere, right? So everything goes through the hands of a designer or a person who interprets it and puts it out there. There are three kind of terms that are thrown around when we talk about pixels. That is PPI, which is pixels per inch. And these are the picture elements in a computer bitmapped image. So this is, in essence, when we talk about, God bless, when we talk about display resolution, we're talking about pixels per inch. Dots per inch refers to printed dots or printer resolution. It refers to the dots of ink or toner created by an image setter or printer. It's the most inappropriately used term in the field because often people refer to this as PPI, right? But really, it's the dots that are being sprayed onto the page per inch. And then lines per inch, which is the frequency of printed tonal images as it comes down the screen.
I've never heard that one before.
Lines per inch? Yeah, so it describes how, as each line, so if you think about the dots being sprayed onto the page, they're being sprayed at a rate of how close they are to one another. So those things have to align. You don't hear it anymore, really, because the printers do all of that for us, so we don't have to, which is lovely. But it's good to know, right? That some engineer out there has to make all those calculations. So your bitmapped images, like kind of a review here, in the top paragraph, they're existing on a fixed grid. They restrict the image's optimum resolution to the PPI used at the time of conception. So whether you scan or you use a digital camera, however you bring that in, it can't get any bigger than how you collected it, right? So when in doubt, collect more than you need. It's better to kind of find your way back than to try to find your way to something that was never there to begin with. The beautiful thing is that interpolation methods are available. And when I started teaching 20 years ago, it cost a lot of money to interpolate an image properly. Like hundreds of dollars. You had to buy separate software from Photoshop that cost hundreds of dollars to scale an image up or down. You now have that built into Photoshop. So when students say, God, Photoshop is so expensive, why is it so expensive? That's why it's so expensive. They've got engineers working constantly, lots of software engineers trying to develop the best product. It doesn't make it all right that they've made it so crazily difficult.